My name is Grace, and I'm 32 years old. Standing at my parents' doorstep this Christmas Eve, holding a $5,000 bottle of wine felt surreal. For 15 years, my mother barely acknowledged my existence because I didn't follow the path she'd mapped out for me. The $150 million news tucked in my coat pocket was about to change everything. Before I share what happened that night, where are you watching from? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible to someone you love. Because this story might just show you how validation can come from the most unexpected moments. Growing up in Connecticut, our house looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence manicured lawn, the whole suburban dream. My mother, Margaret, taught 10th grade English at the local high school, and she wore that identity like a badge of honor. Every conversation at dinner tables, every introduction at parties, she'd beam, while saying she was shaping young minds. My father, David, worked as an accountant downtown, quiet and steady, always smoothing over the rough edges in our family dynamics. My older sister, Sarah, came first 3 years before me, and from day one, she seemed to understand the assignment. She'd sit still during church color inside the lines and played teacher with her dolls while Mom watched with pride. I remember being 5 years old watching them together, Mom braiding Sarah's hair while they talked about her future classroom. By the time I turned 8, the differences were impossible to ignore. While Sarah arranged her stuffed animals in neat rows for pretend lessons, I was taking apart the family radio to see how it worked. Dad found me surrounded by springs and circuits on the garage floor, completely absorbed. He laughed and helped me put it back together. But Mom's face when she found out told a different story. That summer, I started a lemonade stand like lots of kids do. But instead of sitting behind one table, I convinced 5 friends to run stands on different corners, and I supplied them all with lemonade mix I bought in bulk with my birthday money. I called it my franchise system, though I didn't know that word yet. Made 3 times what any single stand would have earned. Mom found my notebook with all the calculations and profit margins. She sat me down that night, worried look creasing her forehead, asking why I couldn't just enjoy being a child like normal girls. The comparison to Sarah became a constant soundtrack. During 4th grade parent-teacher conferences, Mrs. Peterson praised my advanced math skills, saying I was working at a 7th grade level. Mom immediately asked about my handwriting and why I didn't participate more in group reading. She'd brought Sarah's old report cards to compare. On the drive home, she kept saying how Sarah's teachers always called her a joy to have in class, so helpful, so eager to please. Middle school widened the gap between who I was and who Mom wanted me to be. I joined the robotics club, staying after school to program basic movements into tiny machines. Mom would pick me up lips pressed thin, asking why I wasn't interested in drama club or yearbook committee like Sarah had been. She decorated Sarah's room with certificates from poetry competitions and pictures from school plays. My room had circuit boards and programming manuals I'd bought with lawn mowing money. The first time I heard her diminish me to others hit harder than any direct criticism. We were at her colleague's house for a summer barbecue. Another teacher asked about her daughters, and Mom launched into a 10-minute story about Sarah's acceptance into the National Honor Society, her volunteer work at the Literacy Center, her natural gift for teaching. When the woman asked about me, Mom's whole energy shifted. She gave this tight smile and said I was going through a phase, finding myself probably grow out of it soon enough. I stood frozen behind the screen door lemonade pitcher, trembling in my 12-year-old hands. That became her standard response about me. Grace is finding herself, Grace is exploring options, Grace will settle down eventually. Meanwhile, Sarah collected achievement awards and teaching certificates, each one displayed prominently in our living room. My science fair wins got a brief mention at dinner, then forgotten. My coding competition trophy sat in my room where no one would see it. 8th grade brought the moment that really defined our relationship. I'd spent 6 months building a website for local businesses, teaching myself HTML and basic JavaScript from library books and online tutorials. The day I got my first paying client, a real estate agent who paid me $500, I ran home bursting with excitement. Mom was in the kitchen with Sarah, helping her prepare a presentation about educational psychology. I announced my news holding up the check like a winning lottery ticket. Mom glanced at it, turned back to Sarah, and said we could talk about my computer hobby later. That night at dinner, she spent 40 minutes discussing Sarah's presentation, while my achievement went unmentioned. By the time high school started, I'd learned to stop sharing my wins with her. Parent-teacher conferences became battlegrounds where teachers praised my STEM abilities, while Mom redirected every conversation to why I wasn't more social, more involved in traditional activities, more like Sarah. The guidance counselor suggested I apply to technical programs and engineering camps. Mom would nod politely, then hand over Sarah's old essay about why teaching was the noblest profession, suggesting I read it for inspiration. The MIT acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in March. I'd applied secretly using the school computer lab to fill out forms and writing essays during study hall. The financial aid package covered most of tuition, and I'd saved enough from freelance coding projects to handle books and supplies. I sat on my bed holding that thick envelope, knowing this moment would either change everything or destroy what little connection remained with my mother. At dinner, I waited until dessert to make the announcement. Dad had made apple pie, Sarah was home from her student teaching semester, and Mom was in a good mood after her students did well on state exams. I pulled out the letter hand steady despite my racing heart and announced I'd been accepted to MIT for computer science. The silence stretched like taffy. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Dad's eyes widened with something that looked like pride mixed with concern. But Mom's face went through a transformation I'll never forget. Confusion, then disbelief, then a cold anger that made the room temperature drop 10 degrees. She demanded to know how I'd applied without her knowledge. When I explained about the fee waivers and doing everything independently, her voice rose to a pitch I'd rarely heard. This was not the plan. This was not what we discussed. What about the state teachers' college where Sarah went? What about carrying on the family tradition? What about everything she dreamed for me? I tried explaining that MIT was one of the best schools in the world, that computer science offered incredible opportunities, that this was my dream. She cut me off mid-sentence, saying I was throwing my life away for machines and codes that meant nothing. Real fulfillment came from shaping young minds, from human connection, from making a difference in communities, not from sitting alone in dark rooms staring at screens. Sarah tried to mediate, suggesting maybe I could minor in education. Mom latched onto this immediately, insisting I could study computers as a hobby, but major in something practical, something meaningful. The argument escalated until Dad, who never raised his voice, slammed his palm on the table. The dishes jumped. We all stared at him. He looked at Mom and said quietly that I had earned this opportunity, that different paths didn't mean wrong paths. Mom stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. She announced she wouldn't support this mistake, wouldn't pretend to be happy about watching me waste my potential. Then she left the room. We heard her bedroom door close with finality. The next morning, she didn't come down for breakfast. Dad made eggs and tried to keep things normal, but we all felt the shift. Sarah hugged me before leaving, whispering that Mom would come around. But something in her eyes said she didn't believe it either. The months before college passed in a cold war. Mom spoke to me only when necessary, basic logistics about laundry or dinner times. She threw herself into Sarah's student teaching preparation, spending hours creating lesson plans and buying classroom supplies. When neighbors asked about my college plans, she'd say I was going away for school and immediately change the subject to Sarah's promising career. Move-in day at MIT, only Dad came. He helped carry boxes to my dorm room, met my roommate, took pictures by the famous dome. Mom claimed she had a mandatory teacher training that day. We both knew it was a lie. Sarah texted me, "Good luck," with a heart emoji caught between loyalty to Mom and love for me. As Dad hugged me goodbye, he pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside was a check from his personal account and a note that said he believed in me. Freshman year felt like breathing for the first time. Surrounded by people who thought like me, who got excited about algorithms and data structures, who didn't see my interests as weird phases to outgrow. I threw myself into every opportunity. Programming competitions, hackathons, artificial intelligence research groups. My professors encouraged instead of redirected. My classmates became collaborators instead of judges. But success at school highlighted the emptiness at home. Our weekly family calls became exercises in exclusion. Mom would talk about Sarah's classroom victories, her innovative teaching methods, the praise from her principal. When Dad prompted me to share something, Mom would suddenly remember urgent papers to grade. I learned to keep my updates brief and surface level. Classes were fine, Boston was cold, food was okay. The pattern crystallized during Thanksgiving sophomore year. I just won a hackathon with an educational app prototype that helped kids with learning disabilities. The prize included a $5,000 development grant and meetings with venture capitalists. I came home buzzing with possibility, ready to share this achievement that even mom might appreciate since it involved education. But the moment I walked through the door, I became invisible. The entire weekend revolved around Sarah's first parent-teacher conferences as a real teacher. Mom had prepared a celebration dinner, invited relatives to hear about Sarah's classroom management techniques, created a photo album of Sarah's bulletin board designs. When Aunt Patricia asked about my semester, I started to mention the hackathon. Mom interrupted to point out Sarah's innovative reading corner setup in the album. That Sunday, washing dishes alone in the kitchen, Dad quietly asked about my project. I explained the app, showed him the prototype on my laptop, shared my excitement about potentially helping thousands of kids learn better. He said he was proud of me, that Mom would understand eventually that I should keep following my path, but we both knew I'd already lost her. The breaking point came that Christmas. Sarah announced her engagement to Tom, another teacher she'd met at a district workshop. Mom practically glowed immediately, diving into wedding planning and discussing how their children would carry on the education legacy. 3 generations of teachers, she kept saying, like it was written in scripture. When someone finally asked if I was seeing anyone, I mentioned dating Marcus, a mechanical engineering major. Mom's response cut deep. She looked at Sarah and said at least one daughter would give her normal grandchildren who valued human interaction. The room went silent. Even Sarah looked shocked. I excused myself and spent the rest of the evening in my childhood room, staring at old science fair ribbons and wondering if I'd ever be enough. Back at school, I stopped calling home. Emails with Dad kept me connected, but Mom and I existed in parallel universes. She didn't attend my junior year honor ceremony. She forgot my birthday that year, remembering 3 days later with a generic card. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, but her wedding planning consumed most conversations, and I couldn't blame her for choosing happiness over family drama. Graduation from MIT should have been a triumph. Summa cum laude, multiple job offers, professors writing recommendations, calling me one of the most promising students they taught. Silicon Valley companies were bidding against each other. I accepted a position at a fast-growing startup doing machine learning, 6-figure salary, to start stock options, the whole package. Dad flew out alone for the ceremony. He took pictures in my cap and gown, cheered when they called my name, took me to dinner at a nice restaurant near campus. We didn't talk about Mom's absence. Her excuse this time was Sarah's school awards ceremony, where she was being honored as District Rookie Teacher of the Year. The priorities were clear. Moving to California felt like emigrating to another country. 3,000 miles between me and the constant reminder of disappointment. I found a small apartment in Palo Alto, walking distance from the office, and threw myself into work. The startup atmosphere was intoxicating. Brilliant people solving real problems, moving fast, building things that mattered. My manager became a mentor, teaching me about business beyond just coding. I sent photos of my new life to the family group chat. My apartment with its view of hills, the office with its open floor plan and innovation lab, the Golden Gate Bridge during a weekend trip. Sarah always responded with enthusiasm and emojis. Dad sent proud father messages. Mom never acknowledged them. 2 years passed in a blur of 18-hour days and steep learning curves. Our startup got acquired, and my stock options meant a nice payout. Not life-changing money, but enough to matter. I called home to share the news. Mom answered, heard what I had to say, then asked if I'd remembered to send a card for Sarah's engagement party. The conversation lasted 2 minutes. That rejection catalyzed something in me. I stopped seeking approval that would never come and started building for myself. Through networking events, I met James, a veteran entrepreneur who'd sold 3 companies. He became an unofficial advisor, meeting monthly for coffee and wisdom. During one conversation about market gaps, he mentioned the education technology space desperately needed innovation around personalized learning. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent 6 months researching, interviewing teachers, understanding pain points. Despite everything, Mom had given me one gift. Growing up surrounded by education discussions meant I understood the classroom dynamic, the challenges teachers face, the gap between what they needed and what existed. My personal experience with different learning styles, feeling unseen and misunderstood, informed my approach to building something truly adaptive. The decision to leave my comfortable job shocked everyone except James. He said entrepreneurship was lonely brutal, would test every limit I had. Perfect, I thought. I was already practiced at being alone. I gave notice, cashed out my savings, and incorporated my company with a name that meant something only to me: Invisible Learning. Because every kid deserved to be seen. 8 months passed before I told anyone in my family. Not from secrecy, but from self-preservation. Every previous achievement had been dismissed or diminished. This one was too important, too personal, too exposed to that rejection. Dad eventually asked during one of our calls why I'd been so quiet about work. I mentioned starting something new, keeping it vague. He wished me luck and didn't push for details. Those early days tested every resource I had. Technical challenges were manageable, but everything else was foreign territory. Legal structures, fundraising, sales, hiring. I lived on ramen and determination coding until my eyes burned taking calls with potential customers while walking to save on office space. My apartment became headquarters laptop balanced on a card table whiteboard, leaning against the wall, covered in revenue projections and product roadmaps. The lowest point came month 4. My first technical hire, someone I'd convinced to leave Google, quit after 2 weeks saying the risk was too high. He also took code he'd written, claiming it was his intellectual property. My lawyer said fighting it would cost more than starting over. So I did. Rewrote everything from scratch better this time because I knew exactly what I wanted. The first paying customer changed everything. A small school district in Texas, desperate for solutions to help struggling readers. They took a chance on an unknown company because the superintendent's daughter had learning differences, and our adaptive algorithm actually helped her improve. $50,000 contract, enough to keep lights on and hire one part-time developer. I called Dad that night crying with relief and exhaustion. He listened to the whole story, asked intelligent questions, said he wished he could help financially, but was proud beyond words. In the background, I heard Mom ask who he was talking to. He said it was me, that I'd had a good day at work. She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer them. Year 2 brought exponential growth. Word spread through teacher networks that our platform actually worked. Kids who'd been labeled slow learners were suddenly progressing. Teachers could customize lessons for different learning styles without creating 30 individual plans. We hit 1 million in revenue, hired 10 full-time employees, moved into actual office space in a converted warehouse. The team became the family I'd chosen. We worked insane hours, but believed in what we were building. Every customer success story fueled us through the hard days. A dyslexic student reading at grade level for the first time. A teacher crying on a customer call because she could finally reach every student. These moments mattered more than any recognition from home. Sarah's wedding happened during our biggest product launch. I'd planned to attend, even bought a dress and booked flights. Then our biggest client threatened to cancel due to a bug affecting thousands of students. I spent that weekend in the office with my team, pushing fixes and managing crisis. Sent Sarah a generous gift and apology. Mom's response was a text saying I'd shown my true priorities, that I was selfish, and would regret choosing machines over family. The irony stung. My machines were helping more kids than Mom ever could in one classroom, but saying that would be cruel and pointless. So I absorbed another disappointment and kept building. Dad called later, said Sarah understood that the wedding was beautiful, that Mom would need time to forgive. Time. Always more time needed for something that would never come. Year 3 brought serious venture capital interest. The education technology sector was hot, and our metrics were undeniable. User retention above 90%. Teachers recommending us to other districts. Students showing measurable improvement. I pitched to 47 firms, 46 rejections. Each no taught me something, refined my story, strengthened my resolve. Number 48 was different. The partner had a child with ADHD who'd struggled until finding our platform. He understood the mission beyond the money. $5 million Series A funding, enough to scale properly, hire the talent we needed, expand to 100 districts instead of 10. The term sheet signing felt surreal. I'd built something real, something valuable, something that mattered. Mom found out through Sarah, who saw the TechCrunch article. Sarah called genuinely excited, asking why I hadn't told anyone. How could I explain that sharing good news with our family had become dangerous? That each achievement ignored or dismissed took a piece of my soul? I kept it light, said things had been busy, promised to share more soon. With funding came growth and pressure. 50 employees depending on me for paychecks and direction. Thousands of teachers trusting our platform with their students. Investors expecting returns. I worked 100-hour weeks, slept in the office more than my apartment forgot to eat unless someone reminded me. But every metric climbed. Revenue doubled, then tripled. User base exploded. We were making a real difference. Christmas that year, I almost didn't go home. The team was pushing toward a major release, and leaving felt irresponsible. But Dad called not asking, but telling me I needed to come. Something in his voice made me book the red eye. I sat at the same dinner table in the same corner chair listening to the same stories about Sarah's classroom and Mom's students. This time, I didn't even try to participate. Just observed like an anthropologist studying foreign customs. When Mom mentioned her retirement plans, how she'd mentor new teachers, and Sarah would take over her classroom traditions, I realized something crucial. She'd written a story for our family, cast the roles, and I'd refused my part. My success wasn't just irrelevant to her narrative, it was a threat to it. If I could build something meaningful outside her vision, what did that say about her vision itself? The acquisition conversation started quietly. Enterprise companies sniffing around asking about partnerships that we all knew were fishing expeditions. Microsoft was different from the start. They didn't just want our technology. They wanted our mission to continue our team to stay intact, our vision to scale globally with their resources. 6 months of due diligence felt like being dissected while running a marathon. Lawyers examining every contract, engineers reviewing every line of code, accountants questioning every expense. Meanwhile, we had to keep the company growing, team-motivated customers happy. I lost 15 pounds I didn't have to lose, developed a coffee addiction that would make programmers proud, and learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. The initial offer came in at $80 million. Good money, life-changing for everyone involved. But not enough for what we'd built, the potential we had, the impact we could make with the right resources. My board wanted to accept immediately. I fought for better terms, better protections for employees, better guarantees about product direction. Negotiations stretched through October into November. James, my mentor, coached me through every conversation. Remember your worth, he said. Remember what you've built. Remember those kids whose lives are better because you refuse to be invisible. His words carried me through 12-hour negotiation sessions, where I was the only woman in rooms full of suits deciding my company's fate. The final terms came together the week before Thanksgiving. $150 million. Every employee keeping their job with retention bonuses. Our product roadmap protected for 3 years. The opportunity to impact millions of students globally instead of thousands domestically. I signed the papers on November 15th, hands steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. Afterward, I sat alone in the conference room, where I'd pitched my first investor, where I'd hired my first employee, where I'd cried after our first major setback. The weight of success felt heavier than any failure. I had everything I'd worked for, and no one who really understood what it meant. My team was ecstatic, celebrating at a bar nearby. I stayed behind staring at San Francisco lights, wondering if any amount of success would fill the hole where maternal pride should live. The next weeks passed in a blur of transition planning and paperwork. I told my team first, watching tears, and disbelief turned to joy. We'd all have life-changing money. The junior developer who could pay off student loans. The customer success manager who could buy her parents a house. The engineer who could afford his daughter's cancer treatment without bankruptcy. These people, my chosen family, understood sacrifice and success in ways my blood family never would. Thanksgiving came and went with a manufactured excuse about deal complications. Truth was, I couldn't sit at that table knowing what I knew, carrying this massive secret, pretending everything was normal. Dad sensed something, asked if I was okay during our call. I promised to explain everything at Christmas, asked him to trust me. He did, because that's what fathers do for daughters who've earned it. December crawled and raced simultaneously. Final paperwork, transition meetings, handing over responsibilities while maintaining confidentiality. The press release would go out after the new year, but for now, only essential people knew. I practiced what I'd say to Mom, how I'd frame it, whether to lead with the money or the impact. No version felt right because no version would change the fundamental problem. She didn't see me, never had. maybe never would. I bought presents with unusual care that year. For Dad, a first edition of his favorite accounting text, something he'd mentioned wanting decades ago. For Sarah, a donation to her classroom, and a personal gift certificate for teaching supplies. For Mom, I struggled. What do you buy someone who doesn't acknowledge your existence? Finally settled on a crystal apple paperweight from Tiffany's engraved with World's Best Teacher. Either she'd appreciate the gesture or see the irony. Both felt appropriate. The $5,000 wine was an impulse purchase the day before my flight. The store clerk asked if it was for a special occasion. I almost laughed. How do you explain you're about to reveal success beyond imagination to someone who's imagined you as a failure? That you're hoping expensive wine might finally make you visible? That you're 32 years old and still desperate for your mother's approval, despite building something extraordinary without it, standing on the doorstep. Christmas Eve. I could hear Sarah's voice inside, animated about something related to lesson plans. Mom's laughter followed, warm and genuine, in a way I couldn't remember directed at me. Dad opened the door and his face lit up seeing me. He pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual, whispering he was glad I came. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, exactly as it had every Christmas of my childhood. Sarah's engagement photos had joined the wall of achievements, her classroom certificates now outnumbering Mom's. My MIT diploma sent home hopefully after graduation was nowhere visible. The corner chair at dinner was already set for me, physically present, but positioned to observe rather than participate. Sarah hugged me warmly, genuinely happy despite the wedding absence. Tom shook hands awkwardly, clearly briefed about the family dynamic. Mom emerged from the kitchen apron dusted with flour, offering a cheek for an obligatory kiss. Her eyes skimmed over me like I was furniture already returning to Sarah before I'd fully entered. Dinner proceeded predictably. Sarah dominated conversation with stories about difficult students she'd reached, innovative teaching methods she'd developed, the award she'd received for classroom management. Mom beamed occasionally, adding her own wisdom, creating a teacher dialogue that excluded everyone else. Tom nodded supportively. Dad tried drawing me in with questions about California, but Mom would interrupt with another Sarah anecdote. I pushed food around my plate, the weight of my secret pressing against my ribs. Every dismissive glance, every interrupted attempt to speak, every moment of invisibility added fuel to something building inside me. This would be the last Christmas like this. Whatever happened after tonight, the dynamic would shift. The only question was how. Dessert arrived, Mom's famous apple pie that she made exactly once a year. The tradition included everyone sharing what they were grateful for. Sarah went first, thankful for Tom, her students, the family support for her career. Tom was grateful for finding Sarah joining such a welcoming family. Dad, diplomatic as always, was grateful everyone was together and healthy. Mom's gratitude centered on Sarah's achievements, the continuation of teaching excellence, the promise of future generations carrying on the tradition. She looked directly at Sarah while speaking, as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. When she finished, everyone turned to me expectantly, the obligatory inclusion of the forgotten daughter. I set down my fork deliberately, meeting Mom's eyes for the first time in years. She looked away, first uncomfortable with direct acknowledgement. That's when I decided to stop playing by the rules of invisibility. My voice came out steadier than expected when I started speaking. I said I was grateful for challenges that forced me to grow, for people who believed in me when family didn't, for the opportunity to build something meaningful despite being told I was wasting my life. The temperature in the room shifted. Sarah's eyes widened. Dad leaned forward. Mom's jaw tightened, preparing for conflict. Then I continued. I was especially grateful for the acquisition that just changed my life. The casual delivery made it more powerful. Mom's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Sarah asked what I meant, what acquisition. I took a sip of wine, letting the moment stretch, savoring the first time in forever that everyone was actually looking at me. I explained simply. My education technology company that I'd built over the past 5 years had been acquired. The platform I'd created was helping 100,000 students learn better, particularly those with learning differences. Teachers across the country were using it to reach kids who'd been labeled unteachable. Microsoft saw the value and wanted to scale it globally. Mom found her voice asking with barely concealed condescension if this was another one of my startup dreams that would inevitably fail. The assumption that failure was my default cut deep, but also freed something. No more protecting her from the truth of who I'd become without her support or acknowledgement. I pulled out my phone, opened the email from the legal team confirming wire transfer completion, set it on the table where everyone could see. $150 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. Tom's mouth opened, but no sound came. Dad's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. But Mom's face was the revelation. Disbelief warred with shock, followed by something that looked like anger, before settling into an expression I'd never seen before. Recognition. For the first time in 20 years, she was actually seeing me. Not the daughter who'd disappointed her, not the problem to be fixed or ignored, but a person who'd achieved something undeniable. Her mouth opened and closed several times, no words coming. Sarah broke the silence, voice pitched high with excitement and confusion, asking if this was real. How I hadn't told anyone why this was the first they were hearing. I explained about confidentiality agreements, the months of negotiations, the need to keep everything quiet until deals closed. Mom finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you tell me you were building something this significant? The question hung between us, loaded with years of dismissed achievements and ignored milestones. I could have been cruel, could have listed every time she'd changed the subject, when I tried to share my world. Instead, I asked when she'd ever shown interest in my work, beyond suggesting I abandon it. The truth of that statement hit everyone simultaneously. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Sarah looked between Mom and me with new understanding. Tom excused himself to the bathroom, clearly wanting to escape the family reckoning. Mom's face cycled through emotions before landing on something that might have been shame. She tried to recover, asking about the company, what it did, how it helped students. But the questions felt hollow after years of silence. I answered anyway, explained the adaptive learning algorithms, the personalized education paths, the measurable improvement in student outcomes. With each detail, her face changed more. This wasn't just money. I'd built something that helped teachers improved education, made real difference in classrooms. Everything she'd said I could never do from behind a computer screen. The rest of Christmas Eve dissolved into awkward attempts at normal conversation. Sarah tried to bridge the chasm with enthusiasm about my success, asking detailed questions about the company and acquisition process. Dad radiated quiet pride, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my shoulder. Mom remained largely silent, processing this shift in everything she'd believed about me, and perhaps about herself. That night, unable to sleep in my childhood bed, surrounded by remnants of who Mom wished I'd been, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. My door opened slowly, and Mom stood silhouetted against the hall light. She looked older, smaller, uncertain in a way I'd never seen. She asked if we could talk. She sat on the edge of my bed the first time since I was maybe 10 years old. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she started crying, not dramatically, but quietly, tears sliding down her cheeks in the moonlight. She said she was sorry that she'd failed me, that she'd been so afraid of not understanding my world, that she'd chosen to ignore it instead. The confession continued in stops and starts. How she'd felt stupid when I talked about technology, inadequate, when she couldn't help with my homework left behind, when I chose a path she couldn't follow. Sarah had been easy to understand, following footsteps already worn smooth. But I'd blazed a trail she couldn't see, and rather than admit her limitations, she dismissed my journey entirely. I wanted to be angry, to list every moment she'd made me feel invisible, every achievement she'd ignored, every time she'd chosen Sarah's familiar success over my foreign one. But sitting there seeing her vulnerability, I understood something crucial. Her rejection hadn't been about me. It had been about her own fears, her own insecurity, her own narrow definition of success and worth. We talked until dawn, really talked for the first time in my adult life. About the company, yes, but also about the loneliness of building something without family support, the drive that came from being dismissed. The therapy I'd needed to understand my worth wasn't dependent on her validation. She shared her own struggles, feeling obsolete. As education changed, watching her brightest students choose technology over teaching, fearing she'd lost relevance in a digital world. By morning, we hadn't fixed 20 years of distance, but we'd started building a bridge. She asked if she could see the platform, understand what I'd built. I showed her on my laptop, demonstrated how teachers could customize lessons, how students received exactly what they needed, how the system learned and adapted. Her eyes widened with genuine interest, asking how this could help her struggling readers, her ESL students, kids who'd fallen through cracks. Christmas Day felt different. Mom still doted on Sarah, still lit up discussing education, but now she included me, asked my opinion on classroom technology, wondered if my platform could help with specific challenges she'd faced. Sarah seemed relieved the dynamic had shifted, no longer carrying the weight of being the only successful daughter. Even Tom relaxed, making jokes about having a tech mogul sister-in-law. The real change came that evening. Mom had invited her teacher friends for the traditional Christmas dinner party. Usually I'd disappear to my room or find an excuse to leave early. This year, Mom introduced me differently. Not as her other daughter, who worked with computers, but as Grace, who built an education technology company that Microsoft just acquired because it's revolutionizing how kids learn. The pride in her voice was unfamiliar but unmistakable. Her friends, all educators, peppered me with questions about the platform. Several had heard of it, one had even used it in her classroom. Mom listened intently, asking follow-up questions, drawing connections to her own teaching experience. For the first time, we were having a professional conversation as equals, both passionate about education from different angles. Later, helping with dishes, Mom said something that shifted everything. She told me she'd been thinking about retiring, but maybe she could spend her last years implementing technology in classrooms, bridging the gap between traditional teaching and digital learning. Maybe I could help her understand this new world. Maybe we could find common ground in the space between our expertise. The next few days passed in a blur of connection we'd never had before. Mom wanted to understand everything, not just about the company, but about my journey. The nights sleeping in the office, the failed partnerships, the moments I'd almost given up. She shared parallel struggles from her early teaching days, times she'd felt like a failure student she couldn't reach despite trying everything. Dad watched this reconciliation with quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching my eye with a small smile. He'd held space for both of us all these years, believing we'd eventually find our way to each other. Sarah admitted she'd always felt guilty about the favoritism had tried to redirect Mom's attention to my achievements, but didn't know how, without betraying the mother-daughter bond they shared. New Year's Eve, before I flew back to California, Mom gave me something unexpected. A box of every article, newsletter mention, and printed webpage about my company she'd secretly collected over the years. She'd been following my success all along, too proud and ashamed to admit she'd been wrong, too scared to bridge the gap she'd created. But she'd kept everything evidence of a daughter she didn't understand, but perhaps had never stopped loving. The acquisition became public in January, and Mom sent the press release to everyone she knew. Her Facebook post about her daughter, the CEO, got more likes than anything she'd ever shared. She called weekly now, asking about the transition, the new team at Microsoft, what I was building next. The conversations weren't always smooth. 2 decades of distance doesn't disappear overnight, but they were real. 6 months later, we launched a program putting retired teachers into classrooms as technology integration specialists. Mom was the first to sign up, using my platform to help her colleagues adapt to digital learning. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The very thing that had divided us became the bridge to reconciliation. Her students started calling her the cool teacher who understood both books and bites. Sarah and I grew closer too. The competition Mom had created finally dissolved. She admitted years of resentment about being the golden child, the pressure of carrying Mom's dreams, the guilt of receiving love that should have been shared. We started a monthly video call, just sisters, no parents, rebuilding a relationship poisoned by favoritism neither of us had chosen. The money changed practical things. I bought my parents a house closer to Sarah, set up education funds for future nieces and nephews, created a foundation for underserved schools to access educational technology. But the real change was internal. Success hadn't brought the validation I'd sought for so long. Instead, it had revealed that validation was never the point. The point was building something meaningful, helping kids learn better, proving to myself that my path had value, regardless of who recognized it. Mom and I will never have the easy relationship she has with Sarah. Too much time passed, too much hurt accumulated, too many fundamental differences in how we see the world. But we have something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect, hard won understanding, the knowledge that love can exist even when approval doesn't, that family bonds can stretch almost to breaking but still hold. Every Christmas now, I still sit at the same dinner table, but no longer in the corner chair. Mom tells stories about implementing technology in her classroom, about students who finally understood concepts through digital tools, about the bridge between traditional and modern education. She introduces me as her daughter, who revolutionized education technology, and the pride is real complicated, but real. The $150 million sits mostly untouched, invested in growing, because it was never about the money. It was about being seen. The irony is that I had to become impossible to ignore before Mom could see who I'd always been: a builder, an innovator, someone who took the pain of invisibility and transformed it into something that helped other invisible kids be seen. Looking back, I wouldn't change the journey, not even the painful parts. Being ignored taught me self-reliance. Being dismissed developed resilience. Being invisible in my own family made me determined to create something undeniable. The scar tissue became armor, then strength, then the foundation for everything I built. Mom was right about one thing: education is the most noble profession. She just couldn't see that education takes many forms, that teaching happens through technology, as much as textbooks, that some of us are meant to build the tools rather than wield them. We were always on the same side, working toward the same goal, just from angles so different we couldn't recognize each other as allies. That Christmas revelation changed everything and nothing. I'm still the daughter who chose technology over teaching, who lives 3,000 miles away, who speaks a professional language Mom will never fully understand. But now I'm also the daughter she brags about at teacher conferences, whose platform she uses daily, who proved that rebellion isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's just a different way of carrying forward the same values. The last time we talked, Mom mentioned a struggling student who'd made breakthrough progress using adaptive learning technology. She said she finally understood what I'd been trying to tell her all those years ago: that technology isn't cold or impersonal. In the right hands, with the right heart behind it, it's another way of reaching out, of seeing kids who might otherwise disappear, of making sure no one stays invisible. She thanked me for not giving up, not on the technology, not on the company, and not on her. I told her the truth: that every line of code I wrote was partially an attempt to prove I had value, that every feature designed was influenced by years of feeling unseen, that the company's success was built on the foundation of our failure. We couldn't have one without the other. Now, when young entrepreneurs ask for advice, especially women in tech with families who don't understand their path, I tell them this: success doesn't guarantee acceptance, but it can create space for conversation. Money doesn't buy love, but it can purchase the attention needed to rebuild connection. Most importantly, the validation you're seeking from others is actually something you need to give yourself first. Every Christmas since that revelation night, Mom asks to see what I'm building next. Not because she fully understands it, but because she understands it matters to me. That's all I ever really wanted. Not approval of my choices, just acknowledgement they were mine to make. The $150 million was never the point. It was just the number that finally made her look up and see me. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to achieve something extraordinary just to be seen by someone who should have seen you all along? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that their path has value, even if no one else sees it yet. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the biggest success is just becoming impossible to ignore.